Hi, everyone. Welcome back to HR Office Hours. I'm your host, Maddie, and I am super excited to be here with the fabulous Meredith Ring. Meredith and I became acquainted, I think it's about 3 years or so back, and I don't really remember the exact details how this happened, but sometimes you're just on LinkedIn, you're out there just checking things out, and Meredith had posted seeking out panelists or speakers to join her in a project for the University of Chattanooga HR program. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just shoot my shot and say, I don't know if I'll be a match for this or not, but if you need help, hey, I'm here for it. We can have a chat if you think I might be a match. And we connected, and here we are several years later. And that was a fun time. Meredith, do I have that right?
Yeah, no, I think you captured it exactly how I remember it. I had posted kind of a call for speakers for this program. That's a big part of the HR Leadership Institute is bringing in outside voices who have that practical hands-on experience. And so really, I was looking for people that I didn't know yet because I wanted to make sure that my cohort met people who were outside of my typical network. And so, yes, I posted on LinkedIn, and thankfully you saw it somehow and reached out and we connected, and kind of the rest is history, like you said. And the session that you joined was one of our first ones. It's one of my favorites. It is called Workplace and HR Trends. And the session that you came to was a great discussion, but the year after, I mean, this conversation has gotten like so good every year because there's so many things that HR leaders are trying to navigate with the different legislation and policies that are happening now. So that one is one of my favorites just because it's always relevant and the conversation is always a little bit different.
Yep. Yep. And speaking of trends, and I'll just change that word to trendy a little bit. I think I share this with you briefly too. And a little shout out back to my first co host on this podcast, Dave. Back when I was going to be a panelist, one of my focus, because, I'm a person, was like, hey, what am I going to wear to this panel, right? Because I'm an HR department of one. I'm not customer facing. A lot of our workforce is very decentralized. So there are days that I don't really see anyone. And so we're business casual. And this was a day that happened to be Valentine's Day. And I sought out advice. Hey, what should I wear that might be representative of me as a person, but also professional because I am meeting folks for the first time. And there are all kinds of personalities, characters, even in well, all professions, HR specifically, because that's what I was representing that day. And Dave gave me the advice of, wear something that you feel comfortable in that represents you. And I'm like, you know what? I like themes. I'm going to wear this red dress. I mean, it wasn't trendy per se, but it was on theme. And, you and I were talking about that one day, and we were talking about how it is important to keep those things in mind too as we are developing relationships and in the workplace, because authenticity and what that means to you as an individual and as a practitioner and professional is important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny that you were kind of worried about what to wear because that's a journey that I've had myself, and I've really leaned into a little bit more free expression as I have gone out on my own because I don't feel as constricted by kind of that corporate environment. But I wear a dress almost every time I facilitate. That's what I feel most comfortable in. And usually it's a sundress. And I know that that may not seem as professional, but I think I had this time in my life where I remember getting dressed for an interview and wearing a blazer, and I just felt like I was playing dress up in my mom's closet. It didn't feel like me at all. And I realized that I work better when I feel like I'm showing up as my true self. And so another thing you've probably noticed about me and others on, LinkedIn, or if they've met me in real life, is I almost always have these sunglasses on my head. It could be the middle of winter. It's like my comfort. I don't know what it is. It's just how I like to show up. It makes me feel like who I am. And so I think, again, at some point I would have said, oh, that might be unprofessional. But now I think people have come to know me for it, and it's kind of my signature. So I think when I look back at the pictures from that event that we did, I saw the dress and I didn't think anything of it when you showed up because you just presented yourself so professionally, so calm and confident. And also, fun little tidbit, Valentine's Day is my favorite holiday. And so I was probably, I don't remember what I was wearing, but it was either probably hot pink pants or some sort of like pink and purple dress because I wanted to be festive as well. So it's so funny that without even talking about it, we were aligned on that.
That's, and it's like those little parts that are okay. I'm choosing to say are okay to bring to work, to our professional meetings, panels, how we represent ourselves. There are ways to do that in a way that serves us professionally and represents us well. But there are ways that, maybe also don't work out super great. And there are distinctions, right? We have to remain self aware as well. When I think through that, maybe the full pantsuit for some of us doesn't serve us because, like you were saying, I'm not going to feel like myself. I'm going to feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to represent myself the way that I truly am. So it's funny that that conversation has shifted like cookie cutter, one size fits all. And that's a good thing. But we also have to remain self aware of maybe not every venue is okay for me to wear this bright red dress because that would not be acceptable.
Yeah, I think for me, different clients, there's different things that might be more appropriate for them. So I have some that are more in like the hospitality space, and I feel like I can be a little more laid back and a little more bold in my dress there. But when I go into more corporate places, I don't want to say I tone it down, but I don't want to draw unnecessary attention to myself. That is not my goal, right? My
Mhm.
goal is to feel comfortable so that I can do my work well. It's not to distract from anything else that's going on. So, what I'm wearing today, I probably wouldn't wear in front of a lot of clients, but here on this podcast, I don't see why not, right? But I think you do have to be respectful of the environment and the culture, and really, you're not changing yourself, you're just being respectful of it.
Is there a little bit of extra mindfulness about it because you are meant to be the expert as you're going in as a consultant to these workplaces anyway? So I would imagine, maybe I'm speculating incorrectly, that it's not something you necessarily ask unless maybe it's like a safety type of situation where you have to ask like, hey, am I okay to wear these shoes or something like that, where you probably have to just know intuitively what's okay and what's not.
Yeah, I think the first time I meet with someone, I'm pretty neutral and then I get to know them and I see what the norms are there, but I think really the biggest thing that affects my choices is safety. So I'll ask like, do I need to wear closed-toed shoes? That's going to change the whole outfit probably, right? Or, I've worked in some manufacturing facilities where I'm just on the floor walking around, but it's like you need to wear certain clothing so that it doesn't get caught in a machine. So that becomes less about free expression and more about safety for
Just
sure.
safety.
But I think most of the time, I'm just, I'm very perceptive. And so I'm gauging my first meeting with that client to see how they're dressed. And that gives me a clue into what might be acceptable in that work environment so that, again, I'm not drawing unnecessary attention to myself and can fully support the work that they're doing. So yeah, I think it's kind of a combination of factors.
And I don't want to belabor this too much, but it is important to the workplace, right? Because we are all entering at different points in our journey. Even if we are at a later point in our career, if we're starting a new role in a new company, we're still new. So
Mhm.
we're learning those ropes. Something that I tell new hires when they ask me invariably, even though they get the guidelines on dress, even though I provide example pictures, it's still not the same thing. And I give that same advice like look, just give it a couple days, wear something pretty conservative. And if you question it, just don't wear it. Just look around, see what everybody else is wearing, and then just kind of decide what works best.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good rule of thumb. Now, we spent a lot of time on actual clothes, but that's not the only self awareness we need to have, right? Because even in our in our speech, our demeanor, the types of conversations that are not work related we need to have. We need to have that level of self awareness, or even I would imagine in the types of approaches that you have in how you manage the projects that you present. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Yeah, I always tell my clients that self-awareness is the foundation for leadership development. So, it's important that I have that self-awareness as I go in. And again, I am very perceptive as a facilitator. You kind of have to be. I'm gauging the room to see how things are being received. Every meeting, I'm paying attention to people's facial expressions, what they're saying, what they're not saying, and that is going to guide the path forward because I want to make sure that what I'm saying is connecting with them. So there is a lot of kind of adapting on the fly that has to happen, or just I'll pause and say, okay, I'm going to give us a second to reevaluate. It seems like this is not landing. So, how can we make sure that this gets across the way that we need it to?
I know I've been in those situations where you try to figure out how to restate things five different ways, or even paint word pictures, and maybe you feel like, okay, I am not getting through. What do you do then when you don't feel like you can get through? What kind of questions do you ask to get some feedback from them to be like, okay, help me understand what information I need to give you back so that I can fill in those blanks and I can help you understand where I'm trying to get to?
Yeah, I think, wow, that's a hard one because there's so many factors that could determine which direction I go. If there is an opportunity to kind of give people information, let them reflect on it and come back to it at a later time. That is my preferred approach. Like if it's a meeting, if it's in a session, it's really important that before we get to that point, I have established this feeling of psychological safety where they feel that they can ask questions, that they can speak up. And so if that hasn't happened, I'm not going to make any headway no matter what questions I ask. So I do like to set some ground rules at the beginning of a session of, here are the rules of engagement. One, that you assume positive intent in everything that we do. Two, that you keep an open mind. Um, Three, that you kind of like, you're going to get out what you put in. So it's up to you what you're willing to come prepared to do. And four, that you hold one another in this room accountable. So if I am not assuming positive intent, I need them to call me out on that. And so I try to model that pretty early on in the sessions of that accountability and that reinforcement. But I think it really kind of happens in the moment where I'll look for that one person who I know is willing to speak up. And I'll just say, hey, so and so, what's happening here? People seem really quiet. And, sometimes if you pull people aside quietly instead of in front of the
Mhm.
whole group, that also helps people feel more comfortable because sometimes in a group it can be really intimidating to say, I don't understand what you're saying or what we're supposed to do. And so a lot of the times what I'll do is I'll have people in small groups. And so then they're working on something and I can kind of gauge the room. I can see, are people just talking, chit-chatting, or are they working on the task at hand? Or, I think I just look at people's faces most of the time and I say, okay, I can see we're not getting this. So let's try another example. But sometimes it's just calling on them in the audience to prove that they understand it. So I try and build some of that in there, that comprehension check of like, not just, hey, do you understand this? Because most of the time, people will just nod and they'll just shake their head and say, yeah, I get it. But if you ask for an example, it becomes clear that they didn't understand it. So I think that can sometimes be a good way to gauge is just say, okay, can someone in here give me an example? And if nobody's willing to speak up, that might be indicative of something of misunderstanding, or it might not, right? But I think, like I said, it kind of just depends.
You've got me thinking about so many things because when you are doing leadership development and you're facilitating, if I'm the person receiving the information, I might be thinking, am I just part of the collective in the tick the box for this training or this development session? Or does this person really care about me as the individual? right? And so building that rapport is two things. Yeah, like, am I charismatic enough to lead this presentation? But do you care enough about me as an individual to care about what I think? That building rapport is more than just us standing up and being charismatic and delivering training and being exciting. I'm really appreciating what you're saying and having that. I think you're the queen of building that rapport because I've seen you in action. So I appreciate that. I will acknowledge I am terrible at chit chat without a specific goal in mind. Like, I'm terrible. I can't talk about the weather. My husband's great at it. He's the introvert and I'm the extrovert. So it's like hilarious. You are the queen of like making people feel comfortable.
That's a very kind compliment, though. Thank you. And I'm actually an introvert, so it's funny hearing that you, as an extrovert, struggle with chit chat because I think I've learned it over time. It doesn't necessarily come natural to me, but I think I've learned if you just ask people questions about themselves and get them talking so that you're not having to like lead the whole conversation, that helps a lot.
I'm thinking it's important as we're facilitating that you're not there. I mean, you are there with the goal, of course, that whoever engaged you in that assignment has for that assignment. But I would imagine that you really want it to be meaningful for every individual in that space.
Yeah, and again, that's why I set those expectations early on, and I even usually give a caveat that is, you know, you may come to this session with a lot of experience, but my goal is for you to have one thing that you've learned today. You have one takeaway. And sometimes you're going to be more of a participant where you're truly learning and engaging. But if that's not happening and you are more of an expert than I am, which happens, what I want you to do is I want you to contribute. I think that's really important because I don't ever want someone to walk away from a session and say, I didn't get anything out of it. Well, that may not have been the point. The point may have been that it is your time to step up and contribute. Leadership development is not a passive thing. I can't just pass this information and knowledge to you. It is an active experience where you have to step up. And sometimes leadership is contributing and saying, here's what I have to share. And sometimes it's taking a step back and following or letting other people lead too. People often have a very narrow concept of what leadership is. And so I think some of my sessions do challenge people to think a little bit differently about that.
I feel like this is going beyond just leadership and training. I feel like you're dropping just facts about human life, lessons in life, right? These are things that we can adopt to our day-to-day life as well. Just how do we make those commitments? How do we give back? We should engage. Maybe we are not the recipient of the information. We have things that we can also contribute through the process. There's not always something in it for us, but maybe there's something we can give to someone back. I'm big on the community in the giving back aspect as well. So you're just dropping the facts today, Meredith,
I mean, I feel
beyond the
like
work.
my background's in industrial organizational psychology, and so people will often say, "Oh, does that mean you're analyzing me?" And part of me wants to say, "No, no," but truly, I am
Little
constantly
bit.
evaluating human behavior. I'm constantly people watching. I think people are fascinating, and I think a growth mindset is so important to just be willing to learn something new. I kind of with the giving and receiving, it's also like I am often a lot younger than the people that I am in a room in front of. They have to be open-minded to learning something from someone younger, and I learn something from the younger generation all the time. Like I teach a class at UTC to students that are mostly Gen Z, and I mean, the things that I have learned through that experience are pretty impressive. And so I hope that, as we go on, we see the value of people with different perspectives, even if they have less life experience. We all have different life experience that is valuable that we can all learn from. So I think it's just being curious. That is another one of my rules that I forgot to mention earlier, is that you have to operate with curiosity, not judgment. So that goes hand in hand with kind of that assume positive intent. but I think the world would be a better place if more people operated with curiosity instead of judgment of like, huh, I wonder why they said it that way. Because as humans, we tend to jump to the worst possible conclusion instead of the best. And so I think we need to
Yes.
have some sort of in between there of they said it this way and maybe that's not what they meant. Or,
Mhm,
that did hurt my feelings, but I don't think that they intended to do that.
mhm. So there is this difference of training, right? And this leadership development. How do you describe that distinction?
Training is a very specific thing, and humans do need some training, but it's not on leadership. So, training is I'm going to teach you how to do something. Development is really allowing people to figure out the how for themselves. It's here is the objective. How are you going to get there?
Love that.
And I think that's my preference, and I joke that like that's why my dog doesn't know any tricks is because I am a development professional. I'm not a training professional. And so she cannot sit on command. But I think there's a lot of assumptions that go with development. And some of those are that you kind of get out what you put in. You have to be motivated to do it. So I cannot force you to change. Another one is that I don't think I'm the expert. I don't think I have all the answers. My job is to be a facilitator. It's to help you come to those conclusions on your own. And so dogs probably need training more than they do development, but I think humans, when it comes to leadership, there's no one right way to be a leader. Your leadership style is going to be a little bit different than mine, and what makes it effective is how it is received by our followers. So, my leadership style in one organization may work really well, but when I move to another organization, it may not because I have a different set of people underneath me. And so, there is that flex. So, I think that's another thing I'd say about development is it's never ending.
Mhm.
Right? You can't check a box and say, I'm a leader, I'm developed. No, leaders should constantly be growing and learning and applying new skills. And the thing about leadership is it's a relatively new science. And so we didn't know a ton about it like 30 years ago. And so if you've gone through a training program that says, yes, I've gone through leadership development 30 years ago, but you haven't touched it since, it's time to take an update because what we know about leadership has changed a lot over the years. We know more, so when we know more, we do better, right? We need to take that information and do something with it. And I think that is a big barrier I see for a lot of people is they have this mentality of what leadership means to them. And again, I think leaders should operate with some sort of humility to say just because I've done it this way doesn't mean that that's the right way, doesn't mean that someone else's approach is wrong.
We talked about the difference between training and leadership development, but there's ways to get it right. There's ways that maybe not so right. What are some ways that maybe are not stellar in leadership development that you've seen that you're like, no, do not recommend?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times what I see is leadership programs will prepare leaders for the best case scenario instead of
Mm.
reality, which is
Oh,
really dangerous to me because you're setting people up to fail that way. So you've got to give them realistic scenarios that they're going to encounter. It needs to be challenging. It can't just be easy. It needs to really give them an opportunity to make mistakes in a
mm,
safe environment. So I'd say that's one. Another thing I see pretty often is people focus too much on concepts instead of practical application. That drives me crazy because it's like, okay, you just spent a ton of money on this great idea, but then there's usually no follow through of that either. And so that's another pitfall I see is like people will do a 2 day retreat and then crickets, right? It doesn't stick because there has to be a greater commitment to make it work. And then I guess the other thing that like I've created these, so I would be hesitant to talk too badly about them, but I hesitate now to build terminal leadership development programs because I think it gives people this sense of accomplishment, which is great. But I think what I prefer to do now is to create programs that are centered on continuous learning and growth. So if I do build a program, there's always a suggestion of, hey, let's think about the long-term vision in mind of how do we make this sustainable? Because, yeah, we can get everybody to go through it, but then again, you get that feeling of, well, I'm a leader now, so I don't have to do anything else. And so I think it's more of a culture of continuous learning and development and just knowing that really need to involve the leaders of the leaders in the process. So I think a lot of the times people treat leadership development as it's this individual journey when in reality, um, you need your manager's support to effectively implement what you're learning. You need that accountability too. So I think, yeah, I could probably go on all day, but I'll just stop there for now.
No, that's great. What comes to mind when you're saying that is the fact that all of these are tools, right? These are tools. Tools are meant for us to build with. And yes, they're just the start. They're beginning. You need to use them and continue to build with them. It isn't you just have them and hoard them and you keep them and then you've built nothing with it. And then they become stale and obsolete and outdated. And then you've done nothing with them. If all you did was just download the information, but you didn't build with them.
Yeah,
Oh,
you're so spot on about the tools. So that's like some of the pushback I'll get sometimes. I will recommend like the Clifton Strengths Assessment because it's a very positive assessment that gives you a good foundation for what are your strengths and how can you build on these instead of focusing on what you lack. It's how can you
mhm.
build on what you're already doing well, which is really important. But what happens is people say, well, we took that and it didn't go over well. And I say, well, did you do anything with it? They're like, no. I'm like, well, it's not magic. You need somebody to facilitate conversations. You need to embed it in the culture. And so that one, although it is extraordinarily impactful and not very expensive, it is one of the ones I get the most pushback on because people have had a bad experience where all they've done is take the assessment and then that was the end of it. I'm like, no, no, you have to incorporate it if you want it to be effective.
I mean, so are you trying to tell me that if I download a recipe and I buy the ingredients and I just leave the recipe like on my iPad and the ingredients on the bar and I don't actually put it all together, I'm still going to be hungry?
Probably, yeah.
So,
Sorry,
yes,
you're not
it's
going to
just
have a cake from that.
yeah, we just got to take the extra step. And when we approach it like that, then it also opens it up to not just roles who have direct reports or are in a higher hierarchy position. It's open to everyone. We're not just talking about managers, supervisors, executives, vice presidents. We are talking about developing each individual.
Yeah, leadership is not a position, it's not a title. It is how you move through the world. So somebody who is an individual contributor can be a leader of their peers, they can be a leader of processes, of thoughts.
There is value to like listening to individual people regardless of their role, regardless of their status or position in an organization. They have valuable things that they have developed over time through their own doing sometimes, what they've observed, what they've done, their experiences. We may be overlooking that because they don't have the title, their experience, or they haven't trained someone or had the uh, legitimate training or whatever that may be.
Yeah, and I think like that's how you become a leader with a title is that you have to practice that leadership when you don't have the title. That's how you get there. And I think leadership from within is really important. And that pairs with that self awareness of the first aspect of leadership that's really important is knowing yourself and knowing what helps you keep operating optimally. And that's a lot of the work that I do with resilience as well is what does it take to keep me functioning? What does it take to make me thrive? What are those things that get in the way of my success? And knowing that is such a game changer for future because if you don't know that about yourself, how in the world could you lead other people?
Mhm. Well, speak more to that because I know that that's been a focus for you lately, the resilience series. So tell us more about that.
About the LinkedIn series or just resilience
Well,
in general?
just well, both. Tell us about more your thoughts on resilience and the series because I know you've had a couple of exciting things happen with that.
Sure. Yeah, my journey with resilience started in probably 2021. Again, thanks to LinkedIn, I came across this book that was being published by the Center for Creative Leadership, and it was called Resilience That Works: 8 Practices for Leadership and Life. And that is a book that I did incorporate into the HR Leadership Institute. It is filled with evidence-based practices about how to basically sustain yourself through the challenges and demands of leadership, which the thing that I've come to realize is, we are experiencing so much change, so much uncertainty, and that's not going away anytime soon. And oh, by the way, the effects of the pandemic are still
Mm,
those are still affecting us pretty deeply. What happened for me is that, you know, I exercise, I take good care of myself, I have a dog. I was doing all of these things and I was getting really frustrated about why I felt like I couldn't do it all. I was like,
mhm,
why am I not thriving? I am doing everything that I'm supposed to be. And so that's when, kind of my two worlds collided of like resilience as an individual is really exciting, really interesting because I think everybody needs to know how to take care of themselves. But what I realized is that you can't self-care your way out of a toxic work environment. And that's where
that
I
is
made
true.
the connection into my consultancy, which is about helping organizations create environments where individuals can thrive because we spend so much of our time at work, it impacts our life so greatly. That is one of the reasons that I left my corporate job is I was working so hard to create a positive work environment for everyone else, but I couldn't do it for myself because my leader was not doing that. And so it was just a constant frustration. And I think it can make such an impact when you work with leaders because they have so many people underneath them that is really impacting people's quality of life and that just like, that makes me feel really good that if I can improve someone's work life, that will improve their home life as well.
Yes.
So that is kind of how I got into resilience, the long story. And then, as a business owner, I post on LinkedIn pretty frequently. So last year, I did a series called What Keeps Your Light Shining, and that was all about individual resilience. And so I was sharing examples from my own life of the things that help me keep my light shining and kind of maintain me. I was sharing
Mhm.
examples of things that dim my light, and it's equally important to know those things. And then I would share examples of those things that just kind of the cherry on top that make my light shine a little bit brighter. And then this year I decided to shift my content focus a little bit on to organizational resilience or like big picture resilience. This series is called Resilience in Real Life. What I'm trying to do here is kind of break down some misconceptions about resilience and also help people make the ties between how resilience supports an organization. What are those interactions there? And really provide some concrete examples. So each week, I'm just highlighting one example, sometimes from my personal life, things I've observed. And so, really, the first week, something kind of unexpected happened, and it was really entertaining because I had been toying with was that the right one to post this week? But I decided to post about the Charlotte airport, and people had a lot of feelings about it. I was saying that the layovers at the Charlotte airport are way too short. If you've ever flown through for a connecting flight, the shortest time, I believe, is like 35 minutes. And if you've ever been to the Charlotte airport, you know that if you land in Terminal E and you have to get to
Mm,
B, it is
mm,
nearly impossible, even if
no,
you
not
are
happening.
running. Like that is best case scenario because the boarding doors close like what, 15 minutes
Mhm,
before the
15 minutes
flight
before.
takes off. So if you leave your, you know, if you leave maybe a few minutes late, your plane takes off a few minutes late, you're gonna miss that flight. If you had a 35-minute layover in the Atlanta airport, that wouldn't be as big of a problem because they have the plane train and it's just set up a little bit differently that you probably could get where you needed to go. My issue or my beef with the Charlotte airport is that they don't have the systems in place to
Right,
support that. And so it creates problems where you're pushing the responsibility for resilience onto the end user or the traveler when reality is the airlines could probably say, hey, that's not a good idea because what I see happen is you walk by the airline counters and there is the longest customer service line you've ever seen of angry people who've missed their flight. And so one thing I've joked about with the Charlotte airport is one day I just want to bring signs in to cheer the runners on like it's a marathon. Because I mean, you really do see people run through there. And the other thing is you see the not so good side of people who miss their flight. Maybe they've never been through the Charlotte airport. They didn't know what to expect
mhm,
and they are yelling at the gate agents, which I've never understood because they can't do anything, right?
right.
But yeah, I didn't realize how large the disdain for the Charlotte airport was, but that post got about 40 times the engagement of anything else I've ever posted. And it really confused my LinkedIn algorithm, which was really entertaining because now I get a lot of posts about aviation and airports. And also, I think it kind of speaks to how negative spreads faster than positive because I post positive things all the time and those
Right.
barely get any reach. But the thing I post that is kind of negative or critical spreads like wildfire.
Yeah, that is because the negative things really stick out so much more. And it also speaks, we probably have more positive things that happen. We take them for granted, unfortunately. And so it is nice to highlight the positive things, which is something that I try to focus on. But I went on a trip, a very last minute trip. And normally I fly Delta Airlines. This is relevant to the story. But this time I decided to fly United because I did not want a connecting flight because it was a family emergency. It was not work related and it was during bad weather. And I was like, I have to make my flight. I cannot have connecting flights. So I flew out of Knoxville, where usually I fly out of Chattanooga and just connect in Atlanta. One of the things I like to do, also observing people, is even when I'm not working, how is the employee experience, right? Like, to what extent are people loving or hating their jobs today? I'm just really enjoy that because we have things going on at home, at work, whatever. We don't know what people are going through that may be affecting their work. But to your point of like, what are the systems set up like that affect people's work? That has a lot to do with our enjoyment at work too. So I just like to observe how is it going. So I get to Knoxville and I'm always super early. And I'm watching the gate agent, and there was a young mom there, and the gate agent proactively just goes to the young mom. She had a little baby. Hey, let me know if you need anything. If you need to help pre-boarding, I can help you. I overheard this. Mom didn't ask her anything, but she was just super friendly. Let me know. I was like, that's really nice. She doesn't seem like she's hating her life today. She's really friendly and helpful. Later, I see one of the pilots going on for that same plane, taking out a gift card to give to that same gate agent. And it's like I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see the expression on the gate agent's face. And she's like, "Oh," you could tell. She was like, "Oh, happy I can get a coffee," or whatever she was saying. I was like, "Well, that's really nice." That pilot, I don't know if it was his money, I don't know if it was United's money, I don't know, but it was something really nice to see. So I was like, "Well, that's two people seem to be enjoying their day today. That's really nice." So, I'm a gal of size, so I travel with my own seatbelt extender just so that I don't annoy anyone. And I get on the plane, and the flight attendant walks by, and he's like, "Oh, you can't use that one. I have to give you one." Super discreetly brings me one. Didn't make it a big deal, which was so nice also the way that he did it, because sometimes people can be annoyed like, I can't believe you brought this thing on or whatever. And I was like, that's really impressive. Three nice things that I'm seeing on this flight. So I was like, well, that's one leg. I don't know what it's going to be like when I return. So I'm going to keep this in mind. On the return trip, different day of the week. Okay, let me remember to ask for the seatbelt extender as I'm getting on the plane. So I like whisper to the flight attendant, I don't know if this is a good time. She's like, perfect time. She discreetly hands it. Like, great. So I get on my seat as she's going down. I guess they count the number of passengers. She's like, oh, I see your birthday is tomorrow. Happy early birthday. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is so sweet. And I'm like, what is going on? United is really killing it with just kindness. And it was just so amazing. And as I was deplaning, give her the seatbelt extender, and she's like, again, have a happy early birthday. Even after the flight, she remembered that. And I was like, wow, what an amazing experience. And I thought to myself, I may fly United more often because, if anything, I don't know what they're doing with their culture, at least from Knoxville to where I was flying and back, they're killing it because different people, different flights, different times, they seem to be having a good enough experience that they wanted to pass that on. Oh, and the other thing that happened, one of the other passengers had a broken seat, and the flight attendant didn't notice it until we were landing. And on their own, they were like, we can't have this. Would you like X amount of dollars or X amount of mileage credited to you? Didn't ask, they just fixed it. I thought, wow, that's really amazing. So go United. That's a way to build those systems and that culture so your people are happy and treating customers with dignity when sometimes you see clips and you're like, oh, that did not go well.
I'm very pleasantly surprised to hear a good travel story because they're few and far between.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just because, like, we've all had those travel nightmares. But I think what your example does is it's a really great example of how when you have a positive culture, that really can impact the customer experience as well. But it has to start with those employees. And if you can tell that those employees are happy, they're going to treat their customers better. So there really is like a business case for investing in your people and your culture because it will impact your profits ultimately. It's like
Yeah.
now you might fly United more. You might say, "Hey, it was worth it to drive up to Knoxville and not have to deal with those connecting flights. That was a great experience. I'd do it again."
I would do it again. And just to be treated with a lot of dignity and respect. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen either. So that was very impressive. And the extra touches too, not just for myself, but for the other passengers that I observed. And that was two flights. What a coincidence, right? Is that a coincidence? It really made me think.
Yeah.
What are the odds of that? So
Yeah, I think I would say it was more of a coincidence if it was a bad experience than if it's a good one, right? I think good is probably the standard there.
yeah, yeah, they're doing something right. So you were talking about how you've been sharing on LinkedIn and everything like that, because you are a business owner. And I'm always curious how people start their businesses. You shared a little bit about that already, but tell us more about your business itself, what it's called, how you came about naming it what it is, your inspiration for that, all the things.
Sure. Yeah. I had done leadership development internally for several years and I really like discovered that that's the work that I love doing. But I think when you're internal and you build a program, you build it and then you run it. And so you can only build so many programs before you're tapped out capacity wise. I was working for a remote company, and so I wasn't super connected to Chattanooga anymore. And I love Chattanooga. I've been here for 10 years, and I just really wanted to get back into it and impact organizations and our community. And so I had been thinking about starting a business for a long time, but I kept telling myself I had to be older. I kept saying, oh, you need to be in your 40s, you need to be more established. But I think what COVID taught me was if you want something, go for it because life is short and nothing is
Mhm.
guaranteed. And so I thought, I've got a good head on my shoulders. I've got some strong connections. Let me give it a shot. Like I could always fall back into corporate America, which 3 years in, I'm like, absolutely not. I don't want to go back. I love what I'm doing. Um,
That's great.
yeah, but I think for me, it was just wanting to be able to impact more organizations and build more programs because that's what I enjoy doing. So I saw an opportunity come up with UTC's Center for Professional Education. That's how I got involved with the HR Leadership Institute, is that they decided, hey, it's time to evaluate this program and make some changes. And so I happened to meet them just at the right moment. I went in and did a needs assessment and made all those changes. The program that you were a part of was a program that I designed, and that is my baby. I'm very proud of it. So I had started that process pretty much right when I started my business. And starting a business is quite a journey, as you can imagine. I'm sure you have had to do similar things for the podcast and your website and everything. But I think for me, people hear Guiding Light Leadership, which is the name of my business, and they associate it with the soap opera, Guiding Light.
That's funny.
It has
I
nothing
mean,
to do with that.
to be fair, sometimes the workplace can be a little bit like a soap opera. Hopefully not a rom-com, but because that's a whole different level.
Yeah, yeah, but it's not inspiration from that. I think like I went through a lot of different names that I thought were brilliant and that I loved, and then I did a quick Google search and it was taken. So
Oh,
I wanted something that would stand out, and so it forced me to like really keep thinking about what would be a good name. And I think, you know, kind of that light, I've always felt that people have this internal light, that little spark that you want to keep going. And so I think that is the resilience piece of my business. And then the guiding is, I think that leaders should be kind of that beacon of light, that guiding force. Leaders aren't going to tell you exactly what to do, but they're going to guide and light the way for you. That's kind of how it came together. And that's my philosophy of how I work with organizations is I believe that they are the expert. I'm just there as a guide and a facilitator to help them through the process. It definitely has multiple meanings in it, but that's how I came up with Guiding Light Leadership. What I do through my business is I'll go in and I can create leadership programs for organizations. So I have a few clients that that's what I do is I build either like a frontline leader program or a high potential program for. And then there's some that maybe that's not what they need, but they still need some support. I usually work with smaller, mid-sized organizations with a small HR presence. I can kind of assess their leadership needs and then guide them on what would work best. And sometimes that's doing a workshop, but having some continued support. Sometimes I'll look at them and say, you're not ready for leadership development, but you need some help with systems and processes. Let's start there because that's going to be more impactful. And so it's this interesting balance of leadership development is really what I set out to do, but I also think I look at the big picture and I'm kind of
right.
like a holistic consultant where I'm assessing the state of your whole organization to see what are those resilience gaps and opportunities, and then I'll
Mhm.
advise based on that. And a lot of the times that does involve leadership development, but I think the cool thing about my business model is I can come in pretty much and help in different kinds of ways no matter what your org structure is or your budget. I can build something for you.
That's amazing. I like that. Yes, and the name does have to be available. Yes. I feel that pain. I feel that pain. I love it. So, one of the things I always like to know, and you said you love Chattanooga. This is just a fun one. Top 3 places to eat.
Oh, three. Okay.
Yes, top 3.
I probably have 10, but it is hard to narrow it
Okay,
down.
well, you know what? If you wanna do top 5, I'm okay with that. Top 10 may be difficult.
No, I think I love Sidetrack. If you've ever been to Sidetrack over in Hickson,
Okay.
their chicken piccata. delightful. Also,
Okay.
really cool atmosphere there. I don't know, I've been going there for years, it's one of my favorites. You can't go wrong with Tony's Pasta Shop, okay?
Yes.
I love the fettuccine alfredo, love their bread, oh my goodness, so good.
Mhm. Love your bakery bread is the best. Yes.
Yes, and then I'd probably say I'm gonna pick a coffee shop because I think that
Okay.
there's so many coffee shops to choose from, and I love to highlight local business. So there's one in my neighborhood, Goodman Coffee Roasters. And I will say this at some point, like I love their coffee, but at some point I did go on a journey to find the best pain au chocolat in Chattanooga. And they win hands down. So I go for
Okay.
coffee and a good little pastry, chocolate croissant. But yeah, I really like the atmosphere there. The coffee is good and the pastries are good, so you can't go wrong.
These are the important questions we ask here. Just the
Absolutely.
top ones. Well, this was really great. Maybe some other time we'll talk more about some additional topic and or revisit some of these, share more about what's going on in the world of leadership development, learn some more tips. And yeah, until next time, we'll see you. Remember to like, subscribe, all the things, add your comments, and we will drop the name of that book that you mentioned.
It's called Resilience That Works: 8 Practices for Leadership and Life.
And we will also drop the website for your business, which is again,
Guiding Light Leadership.
perfect, perfect. Well, this is fantastic, Meredith. Thanks so much for joining today. Have a great
Absolutely.
one.
Thanks.